Keeping one eye on the clientele, Earl dunked the mug in the dirty water and polished it with an old towel he kept behind the bar. When the glass was as close to clean as any dusty-eyed, road-weary traveler would expect to see in a small town like Blankenship's mill, he tucked it away beside the others on a shelf under the counter. In the far corner, a few of the locals were playing a rare, friendly game of poker. The night was young, though, and drinking and gambling typically led to a fight before closing time. He'd have to keep an eye on that table, but he wasn't too concerned. Next to the mugs, he kept an old club he'd carved out of a hickory branch when he first settled in the Dakota Territory. To the locals, it was known as Earl's Peacemaker. The handle was worn smooth by years of use, and the end was impregnated with the rust color of dried blood. There were a few passers through milling about, sipping on whiskey and talking about their westward-bound adventures, or speaking in fevered whispers about gold veins and mining techniques. And then there was Clarence, the town drunk, sitting at the end of the bar next to the vacant piano. He didn't have his shakes yet, but Earl knew they would come soon if he didn't intervene. "Hey, Clarence," he said, "come on over, sit a spell, and have one on the house." Clarence hopped off the stool, brushed his long, greasy bangs back with his fingers, and gave Earl a yellow, toothed grin. "That's mighty generous of you. It has been a dry one, sure has." He slid up to the bar and greedily watched Earl pour him a glass of bottom-shelf rotgut from the swill barrel. "Generous indeed," he said, licking his lips and thinking about the warm swill and hoping that Earl had to empty more whiskey glasses than beer from the night before. The idea of choking down that foul concoction made his stomach lurch. Little beads of sweat stand out on his forehead. They accumulated at his temples and ran down his neck. "He's pouring it slow just to torture me," he thought. "Hurry up, you xenophobic fucking bastard." By the time Earl set the mug on the counter, his hands were shaking and his palms were sweaty. He lifted the mug with both hands to keep from spilling it and downed it without taking a breath. "Thank you," he said in between breaths. "Want another?" Earl said, grabbing the mug before he had a chance to answer. He drew from the swill barrel again and filled the mug with what was left. "That's the last of it. You'll have to rely on your wits for a refill." "Don't worry," he said. He took a sip from the mug, wanting to make it last at least until he found someone in a generous mood to buy him another. "I'll manage. Always do." "That you do." Earl stole a look at his pocket watch. It was 20 till midnight. Too quiet for a Saturday, he thought. He rubbed his temples. The headaches were getting stronger. He could feel the urgency, the pressure building up right behind his eyes. "How long has it been?" 2 weeks or more." "When you getting a piano player, Earl?" Clarence said. A piano player," he said, miming with his fingers. "I'll get a piano player just as soon as you become a paying customer," he shot back. "Oh, Earl, you're hurting my feelings." He lifted the mug as if to toast the bartender and drained what was left. "You know I pay indirectly, of course, but I still pay." "I suppose you do, Clarence," he said, dunking Clarence's empty mug into the dirty water. "But you do it at the expense of annoying the hell out of the other customers." "Shit, I bet you'd find something to complain about, even if I was a paying customer." He slipped off the bar stool and began making his way toward the men at the card table. "I think I'll go try my luck at another refill." "You do that, Clarence," he said, huffing on the mug and rubbing out a spot with the dirty rag. "You do that." As Clarence made his way to the table, the last of the passers through walked out the batwing doors and took Earl's hopes with them. "I'm going to have to explain," he thought. "I'm going to have to try and make it understand that it's not always safe and that we could lose everything we've worked so hard for. Everything I've worked so hard for." He could feel the pressure in his head intensify, as if it was eavesdropping on his thoughts. The pressure felt like pure anger, like some sort of acidic passion that was eating him from the inside out. He turned away from the customers towards the mirrored wall that was lined with domestic liquors and put his face in his palms. The pressure was intensifying, and he could feel a small trickle of blood run out of his left nostril onto his palm. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay." The pressure immediately vanished and was replaced with a new feeling, a soothing reassurance. Even the tension he usually carried in his shoulders was gone. He wiped his hands and blotted his nose with a dirty towel, while watching in the mirror to make sure that no one saw and that he was getting all the blood off. When he was finished, he went back to wiping down the bar, where Clarence had been sitting like nothing happened. Clarence had turned a chair around and was resting his chin on the back. He watched the cards get shuffled and dealt, played, and then shuffled and dealt again. All the while, he was building up the courage to ask the winner to buy him a celebratory drink. It was a close match for what he could tell. So far, Jacob Andrews, the town's dentist, was beating the two Anderson brothers, William and Peter, by a significant margin. But Francis Peterson, the blacksmith, was quite literally giving him a run for his money. Jacob was a bit of a tightwad when it came to sharing his good fortune, so he was hoping that Francis would pull ahead. "What do you say, boys?" Jacob said as he shuffled the cards. "Last round." The Anderson brothers looked at each other, and Peter shook his head. "I think you can count us out of this, son," William said. "We're about busted. Suit yourselves. How about you, Francis?" "One last round." Francis leaned forward, rested his elbows on the table, and began rubbing his hands together. "What do you think? Should I go one more round?" he said, looking at Clarence. "Well, is there a drink in it for me if you win?" "There's a drink in it for you either way," he said. He leaned back in his chair and rested his strong, calloused hands on his belly. "Just tell me what you would do in this situation." Clarence sat up in his chair. For once, the stakes were high for him. He knew that if Francis played the hand and lost, there was a chance he would have a change of heart about buying him a drink. But he also knew that if he won, he would probably be able to squeeze another drink or two out of him. "You know," he said, twisting his mustache with his fingers, "I think I'd call it quits. You've already made a good sum off the Anderson boys, and you don't stand to make much off Jacob unless you both go all in. I just don't think it would be all that profitable." Upon hearing his remarks, the eldest Anderson, William, stood up, opened his pocket knife, and began digging dirt from under his fingernails. "What are you suggesting, Clarence?" he said. "Nothing against you fellas," he said, squirming in his seat. "I just mean that Francis and Jacob had a better night. That's all. You two are fine players, real fine indeed. It's just that you win some, lose some, you know? I'm sorry if you... Someone get this poor bastard a drink before I take the carving out his throat, for Christ's sake," he said. He folded his knife and slid it back into the front pocket of his overalls. "Fucking drunk. You know," Francis cut in. "I think that's some sound advice, Clarence. I think I'm just going to call it quits." He leaned forward and put one of his heavily calloused hands on William's arm. "How's about I buy a round for you as well?" "I don't need no damn charity," he said, whipping his arm away. "Me and Pete will make an accountant of the two of you next week." "Come on, Pete," he said as he started to make his way around the table. "We need to get some rest if we're going to put in some extra chores for old man Blankenship in the morning." "Night, fellas," Peter said as he stood up. "It has been a pleasure." He raised his mug in a half salute, downed its contents, and winked at Clarence. "Sorry, no swill barrel for this one." "Yeah, night, Clarence," William said as he slapped him on the head almost hard enough to bounce his face off the back of the chair. "Damn bastards," Francis muttered as he watched the two Andersons laugh their way through the batwing doors. Jacob scooped his winnings into his hat and tossed enough for a drink onto Clarence's side of the table. "Well, I guess that's that. You boys take care." "Thank you," Clarence croaked. His cheeks were flushed with shame and anger. His eyes welled up, threatening to compound his problems. "If only I could kill those bastards," he thought. "They're right. I'm a useless drunk who doesn't know how to keep his tongue under control." He wiped his eyes with his sleeves, snorted, and took a shot at the spittoon. His phlegm hit it with an audible ring and slowly slid its way down the rim into the rest of the muck. Poor bastard, Earl thought. He watched as Francis put a consoling hand on Clarence's shoulder and dropped some loose change on the table as he made his way out. Other than throwing some coin at him, no one cares. No one cares. Now, that's an idea. Hey, Clarence, he called across the bar. How would you like to earn a free drink or two and help me close this place up tonight? Sure thing, he said. You mean it? Yeah, I mean it. If you do a good enough job, you can help me close up every night if you like. Hell yeah. Clarence stood up, swung the chair back around, and scooted it into the table in one giddy motion. Putting both hands on the back of the chair, he said, You know, Earl, I haven't held down a steady job since Jenny passed. I don't know if I could. Shit, I think this will be right up your alley. I tell you what, I'll keep my expectations low. When you help me or don't help me is on you. Thanks. Don't mention it. You can start with shutting the door and putting up the close sign. The two men made it through Earl's closing routine in no time. He was feeling nervous about what he was about to do, so he tried to keep Clarence busy with additional work while he worked up the nerve. He could still feel the steady push behind his eyes, threatening to blow up into a full tidal migraine fury at any moment. He doubted Clarence would be missed, and he reasoned that he could always unload the slush on some other poor drunk. But it bothered him that he was about to do this to someone he knew. The others had all been passers through, wayward travelers on their way to their westward dreams who just happened to stop by the wrong establishment. For them, it was a matter of being at the wrong place at the wrong time. This, as far as he was concerned, would be a larger burden on his conscience. Could you put a quick polish on the mugs for me? Sure. Mind if I have a drink while I do it? What the hell? Sure, you're doing a fine job. I don't see why not. One last drink for the road, friend. One last drink. Clarence poured a mug and greedily drained it. He couldn't believe his luck. It was a drunk's wet dream to work at a bar for drinks. He watched Clarence work his way through the mugs, sneaking extra drinks when he thought he wasn't looking. Dirty little sneak thief, biting the hand that feeds him. Clarence's indiscretion was just what he needed to strengthen his resolve. It'll be like putting down a suffering animal. Just look at the way he shakes. It's now or never. Earl slipped behind the bar, slid the peacemaker off its shelf, and slid it up his sleeve. I need to pull a new cask of beer from the cellar. Think you could give me a hand? Sure, he laughed. You like to get your money's worth, eh? Yeah, I suppose so. This is the last thing. I promise. His hands were sweaty, which made the wooden club feel as if it was slicked with oil. He began to have some reservations about using it, but the pressure in his head became a sharpened sense of urgency. That it could read his thoughts, he had no doubt. He was sure it could sense his resentment along with his fear. There were times when he could sense things from it too, things other than hunger. Things like pleasure from his fear and indifference towards his resentment. When dried his sweaty palms on his trousers, he could sense mild amusement with an undercurrent of impatience. Grab this empty and follow me, he said, motioning towards an old, empty, dusty cask in the far corner of the bar. Boy, Clarence said, hefting the cask, you are getting your money's worth. I think this thing has been sitting in the corner for as long as I can remember. Sure am. An empty cask doesn't make me any money, but a full one will. He grabbed a lamp, lit it, and motioned for Clarence to follow him to the storage room behind the bar. As he followed, Clarence noted that the room was especially dark and musty. The absence of windows, which he could only assume was some sort of theft deterrent, made the small room extremely dark. The lamp did little to light it. About halfway in, Earl reached down and pulled a trapdoor open. From what he could see, the steps leading down were narrow and steep. The flickering light was insufficient to illuminate the floor, and the dancing shadows gave it the impression of a large, multi-fanged mouth opening up wide for a spoonful of whoever was foolish enough to enter it. "Well, go on," Earl said. He was feeling eager to get the whole thing over with, so he could wash up and hit the hay for the night. "Okay," he said as he stepped around and took the first step into the angry-looking cellar maw. "But you keep that light close. I don't want to slip and break my neck." "Go on. I'm right behind you," he said. As Clarence descended the stairs, he stared at the back of his head, trying to figure out just where to hit him to be sure to knock him out. When Clarence had descended to where his head was level with his waist, he straightened his hand to let the small club slide down into his grip. Only his hand was too sweaty and it slipped from his fingers and tumbled down the stairs. With each tumble of the bludgeon, his heart pounded in his chest and thrummed in his ears. Time seemed to have slowed to a snail's pace, and as Clarence turned towards him, cask in hand, he caught a glimmer of accusation in his eyes. The understanding in them burned in the light of the lamp. It was then that he pushed him. Earl's hands shook as he washed his face. When he closed his eyes, he could still see the shock in Clarence's eyes when he pushed him. He could still see his feet flying out from under him and the cask bouncing down after him. He'd heard a loud crash at the bottom and then nothing. No screams. No moans. Somewhere at the bottom, beyond the feeble light, all was musty, broken silence and hunger. The hunger was a corrupt smell. The air was thick with it, and it made his stomach lurch. He'd shut the door in a daze and slid some small wine casks over it for good measure. He doubted that Clarence would make it back up the stairs to freedom, but he wasn't taking any chances either. He put on his nightshirt, crawled into bed, and extinguished the lamp. It was cold, and he was bone-weary. It was times like these that he missed Alice the most. She blew into his life almost as fast as she left it, and even though she'd only stayed a short while, a part of him genuinely loved her. She was a whore from the East Coast, hoping to strike it rich, making the beast with two backs with prospectors. All it ever got her was a hard time with desperate, filthy men and a stack of worthless IOUs. Free rolls in the sack was part of their arrangement, but she didn't have to sleep in his bed. But she did. Every night since the first, she did. Earl fell asleep curled up next to the extra pillow and dreamt of her soft skin, the curvature of her breasts, and the hard peaks of her nipples. Earl awoke to something cold and hard pressed against his temple, and an earthen-smelling hand clamped firmly over his mouth. "S-H-H-H-H. I'm going to let go of your mouth, and you're not going to make a sound. Understand?" "M-F-F-F. H-M-N-F-F-F-F," he affirmed against the foul-smelling hand. "Good." The hand left his face, and a match was struck. Out of his peripheral vision, he saw a face covered in blood and grime. Along with the dancing shadows the flame produced, the effect made him think of what a demon would look like standing amongst the flames of hell. But demons didn't carry guns, and demons didn't sound or smell like Clarence. "Howdy, Earl," he said as he lit the bedside lamp. "So nice to see you again. Make some room for an old friend," he said as he took a seat on the bed beside him. "You know, that was a pretty nasty little spill I had there. Phew, I thought I was a goner. You know, that knocked me out cold? That wasn't very nice, Earl. It wasn't nice at all. Tita Clarence, I'm sore. Didn't I tell you not to speak?" He cocked the gun and pressed it into his cheek. "Don't make me have to tell you again, Earl." "Okay." Earl nodded. "Good. I'm almost ashamed to admit that I'm not here on a social visit," he said, resting the gun in his lap. "I'm here on official business, I'm afraid. You see, I met your friend in the cellar. He told me all about you and your arrangement. Told me how you weren't all that good about holding up your end of the bargain. How he had to sneak up here one night and steal that filthy whore straight from your bed while you slept." Earl groaned and buried his face in his hands. "Don't tell me you didn't know. Come on. Deep down inside, you knew." "Huh. You knew all right. And you still kept him starving in that damned cellar." "Well, you know what, Earl," he said as he pulled his hand from his face Me and him are just alike. That's right. We both get thirsty. We both have needs. I promised to never let him go hungry again, and he promised me the bar. Earl, your bar. You can talk now if you like. I'm so sorry, Clarence. I'm sorry. Please. Earl, just because I say you can talk doesn't mean I need you to blow smoke up my ass. Stop apologizing for something that clearly was no accident. He sighed and began tapping the revolver in his lap. On second thought, don't talk. All I need you to do is sign the deed to this place. And as far as I'm concerned, you get to leave this place alive. Here, he said, placing the deed and pen on his chest. Sign. Earl grabbed the pen, thought about ramming it into Clarence's throat, but an agonizing pressure exploded behind his eyes, leaving one singular impression. Sign. His shaking fingers scrambled to open the document, and he scrawled his name as fast as he could. When he was done, the pain was gone. It left him panting and crying into his pillow. Thanks, Earl. That's mighty generous of you. I do believe you and I are even. He stood up, folded the deed, and shoved it in his front pocket as he made his way to the door. It's been a pleasure indeed. So, you're not going to kill me, he said as he sat up in the bed. Clarence stood in the doorway. One hand rested on the doorknob, and the other, the gun hand, rested on the frame. No, I don't see where that would be profitable. I'm a businessman now. There's just too much risk in crime. Besides, I have to go see to my inventory. Can't do that and hide a crime before first light anyway. He looked over his shoulder, straight into Earl's eyes, and gave a hellish, red-faced grin. Of course, I can't speak for our mutual friend. I do believe he's still hungry, and you owe him a meal. Earl heard the lock click after he shut the door. The lamp began to flicker as a form made its way out of the shadows. The air grew cold and heavy with the coppery smell of blood and the musk of ancient dirt and sweat. As the light went out, and he felt the thing's foul, pale hand touch his flesh, he was left with one last mindless, insatiable impression: the joy of the glutton.